Have you noticed how the Bible speaks about the future without resorting to the language of fiction? It does not describe machines out of curiosity. It reveals structures, authority, control, submission. From the very beginning, Scripture warns that the greatest danger would never be merely an object created by man, but whatever comes to occupy the place of human conscience, decision, and obedience before God. Today, we are surrounded by artificial intelligence, tools that write, organize, calculate, and produce content. That, in itself, is not the problem. The Bible never condemned tools. The problem arises when creation stops serving and begins to govern. When systems start to decide, command, restrict, and demand absolute trust. That is precisely where prophecy begins to take shape. The Bible describes a time when the world would operate under a single logic, a centralized authority, a system capable of regulating who participates in economic life, who has access, who remains within, and who is excluded. For centuries, this seemed impossible. Today, it no longer does. For the first time, humanity is openly working to create an intelligence that not only executes tasks, but evaluates, learns, decides, and coordinates everything. This is what they call AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, an intelligence designed to replace human judgment on a global scale, not as an auxiliary tool, but as a dominant structure. And that is why this subject is so unsettling, because it touches the very heart of the final prophecies. Not as the isolated fulfillment of a single verse, but as the foundation that makes what Revelation describes possible. When the Bible speaks of the image that speaks, the authority that demands loyalty, and the system that controls buying and selling, it is not speaking about technology out of fascination. It is speaking about total dependence, about a world that transfers its trust, its obedience, and its survival to something that does not answer to God. Never before has there existed an instrument capable of sustaining this on a planetary scale. Now, there is. And when someone points out this pattern, the reaction is always the same. Ridicule, silencing, a rush to shut the discussion down. It was so with Noah. It was so with the prophets. It was so with the apostles. Warnings always disturb before they are understood. The Bible never promised that discernment would be popular. It promised that it would be necessary. This video is not an attack on technology. It is a call to attention, not to generate fear, but to recover spiritual clarity. Scripture teaches us to observe the signs, to test the spirits, and to stand firm when the world runs in the opposite direction. The danger was never the tool. The question has always been who exercises authority through it. Throughout this video, you will understand why the discussion about AGI is not exaggeration, not theory, and not paranoia. It is biblical reading applied to the time in which we live. And perhaps by the end, you will realize that the greatest risk is not the advance of artificial intelligence, but the human willingness to hand over to it what should never be transferred. Cross the valley of redemption and face the future in the light of what has already been revealed. The Bible never presented the future as a sequence of astonishing inventions. It presents patterns, movements that return, structures that reappear in new forms. Whenever humanity attempts to replace dependence on God with autonomous systems, the result is the same: concentration of power, loss of discernment, and progressive submission. From the beginning, Scripture records this impulse. In Genesis, there was not merely an isolated act of disobedience in Eden. There was an attempt to assume a kind of knowledge that was never meant to be governed by man. The serpent offered intellectual autonomy. The promise was clear: to decide for oneself what is good and what is evil. This pattern returns at the Tower of Babel. It was not simply a tall structure. It was a project of centralization, a common language, a single system, a world organized without the need for submission to the Creator. The Bible makes it explicit that the problem was not technique, but direction. The structure began to occupy the place of divine authority. Throughout the biblical narrative, this movement repeats itself. Empires consolidate not only through military force, but through systems. Babylon, Persia, Rome, all of them built more than cities. They built mechanisms of control, standardization, and obedience. Power always moved alongside administration, record-keeping, surveillance, and hierarchy. The sword never acted alone. It is within this context that the final prophecies must be read. Revelation emerges as the culmination of an ancient pattern, a world unified by a single logic, an authority capable of reaching every level of daily life. A system that governs not only territories, but behaviors and consciences. For centuries, this scenario seemed distant from practical reality. How could entire populations be coordinated at once? How could economic rules be imposed instantly? How could total alignment be demanded on a global scale? The idea existed. The structure did not. Today, that structure is beginning to take shape. For the first time, humanity is developing systems capable of observing, evaluating, deciding, and executing in real time, without direct human mediation. Systems that anticipate patterns, adjust behaviors, and organize entire social flows, not as occasional tools, but as permanent structures. The Bible did not describe technology in technical terms. It described consequences, a world where authority is transferred, where decisions cease to be individual, where participation in economic and social life depends on alignment with a central system. For this reason, the discussion about artificial intelligence cannot remain superficial. It involves historical direction. It involves the repetition of an ancient pattern, now amplified to a global scale. Babel does not return as a tower. It returns as infrastructure. The risk was never the brute force of technology. It arises when dependence becomes total, when living outside the system ceases to be an option, when obedience is required in a silent, continuous, and automatic way. This scenario is beginning to form, not as a sudden event, but as a process, just as it has always unfolded throughout biblical history. First, the structure, then the authority that occupies it. In the next chapter, we will examine the type of intelligence being built now and why it represents an unprecedented rupture in human history. Throughout history, power has always encountered limits. Deciding, monitoring, and controlling required people, time, and physical presence. No system was able to operate in a total manner. That limit is beginning to disappear. The intelligence being built now does not act as an occasional tool. It organizes flows, anticipates behaviors, and coordinates decisions on a broad scale. Authority ceases to be visible. It begins to operate as a system. The Bible describes this scenario with clarity. A world in which social and economic participation depends on alignment. An environment where obedience is not imposed by force, but by the need to remain within the system. This movement does not arise as a sudden rupture. It establishes itself as infrastructure. First, dependence, then authority. This is how the biblical pattern is completed. The problem was never technology. It was always the transfer of trust. When decisions no longer pass through conscience before God and are instead delegated to impersonal systems, the prophetic structure closes. This is not panic. It is vigilance. Scripture calls the people of God to observe the signs, preserve discernment, and remain faithful when the world organizes itself around a single logic. The stage is being set. The structure is taking shape, and the choice remains spiritual. The Bible never concealed that the end would be marked by organization, efficiency, and centralization. Not by immediate chaos, but by a world too functional to be questioned. A system that solves problems while redefining loyalties. The intelligence now emerging does not need to present itself as a threat. It asserts itself through usefulness, through dependence, through convenience. And this is exactly how Scripture describes the final deception, something many accept because it works. None of this unfolds outside God's control. Prophecies exist not to generate fear, but to form discernment, so that God's people do not confuse progress with spiritual authority, nor efficiency with truth. The biblical call remains the same: to watch, to discern, to remain faithful when obedience begins to shift, when trust changes its place, when conscience starts to be outsourced. The end does not begin with open persecution. It begins when almost no one notices that something essential has already been surrendered. That is why this time demands attention. And that is why Scripture remains sufficient to carry us through it.